Helldivers 2 has been around for a year now, and already it's had its ups and downs. While Helldivers 2 is a good game riddled with some very stupid design decisions, every time I play Helldivers 2, I find myself just wanting to go back to Helldivers, which I feel is the superior game. So this is going to be a comprehensive review of the original Helldivers. Released earlier this month on March 3rd, 2015, Helldivers came out on every Sony platform at the time, being the PS3, PS4, and PS Vita, with the super unique cross-play support allowing PS3, PS4, and PS Vita players to all play with each other at the same time. Coming at this a decade later, there's something insane to me about playing this game on my PS3 or Vita, and knowing that I might be playing with people who are on a PS5. That's just super cool to me. Oh, also, there was a PC port that released a few months later. It's okay. It was the first Sony game on PC in a couple of decades, so that's cool. I don't have much of an opinion on the PC port, but I guess the mouse aiming and 4-player split screen is cool. So, quick disclaimer. I don't hate Helldivers 2. I just think it's a massive step down from Helldivers 1 in most cases, and I want to talk about why I think the first game is more fun. So let's talk about the game. If you played Helldivers 2, the setup is the exact same. Earth has become an authoritarian government with dozens of colonies around the galaxy, where it finds itself locked in perpetual war with its alien and cyborg neighbors. All three factions from Helldivers 2 are here in an early state, where the cyborgs are the ancestors to the automatons, the Terminids aren't as evolved, and the Illuminate are actually fun to fight. There's also a fourth faction that appears in some training and challenge modes. They're not super unique or anything, but it's kinda cool to see them. Also, side note, what happened to this little guy? I love him. What happened to him? Is he safe? Is he alright? Arrowhead, what happened to him? One of the biggest differences between the two games is the assumption of what Helldivers are. Helldivers 2 heavily implies that Helldivers are the main fighting force Super Earth has, while Helldivers 1 implies and hints that the Helldivers are more a special forces group that are conducting operations behind enemy lines, which then results in the Super Earth army attacking the planet after the Helldivers missions are completed. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the feeling I get when I play this game. Don't get me wrong, seeing all the Super Earth ships above planets and seeing the progress of dozens of other players making an impact on the same planet is cool, but I kind of prefer the casual approach that Helldivers 1 offers. Helldivers is a much simpler game in concept, even though it's technically harder on the lower difficulties than Helldivers 2. I usually play this game for an hour or so before I go into work or school, and I'm usually able to complete a few planets in a row, but I'm only doing this on the super easy difficulties. Because of the more linear approach to planets being tailor-made for an offline mode, you can capture and clear multiple planets in a row without having to worry about whether or not you'll lose a planet because of the galactic war effort. And yeah, that's also just a minor thing. I didn't know where to put this, so I'm just putting it here. Helldivers 1 is fully playable offline with up to 4 players in split screen, unless you're on the Vita, with pretty much every feature, minus the overall galactic war effort and any limited time events, being present and playable. Every single planet, difficulty, and feature is playable offline, including full customization. This is honestly going to do wonders for game preservation, because the Helldivers 2 doesn't have an offline mode, so someday that game is going to be completely unplayable. But enough doom and gloom about the future, let's talk about gameplay. Helldivers plays very similar to how Helldivers 2 plays, but from a top-down perspective. You pick a planet, pick where you'll drop to, sneak past enemy patrols, and get surrounded by bullet-spongy enemies while heroic music plays as you complete various objectives. You'll call in stratagems, gather samples, and rack up a huge body count, all in the name of managed democracy. So why do I think this is better when it sounds the same as Helldivers 2? Well, to me, the top-down twin-stick shooter perspective is much more engaging with the feeling of being surrounded. Having a full 360-degree view of your character creates this more intense feeling. In Helldivers 2, when I get surrounded, it feels super unfair because there's no real indicator that there were enemies behind me. I get it's more realistic, but that doesn't always make for a fun game. Being surrounded here and seeing the enemies close in on you while you're running low on ammo is just more intense, I guess. It feels more chaotic. Enemies in this game are also kinda less unfair. Let me explain. While they're technically harder to kill even on the easiest difficulty compared to Helldivers 2, and they do have many enemies that can one-shot you, the enemies aren't these hulking tanks that can kill you across the length of a football field. Most enemies, including ranged enemies, can only attack you when they're on screen, or if they can attack you from off-screen, there's usually some sort of indicator that shows you're going to get attacked. Basically, you always know when you're in danger, which Helldivers 2 can struggle with sometimes when it's getting super chaotic. Another feature I really like is how co-op works in this game. In co-op, the game feels more chaotic by forcing players to be in the same area together. You can't wander off too far from your teammates, which I kinda like because it forces you to work with your teammates, and with friendly fire, it makes you have to place your shots carefully when you're in close proximity to each other and are slowly being surrounded. I also really like the samples in this game. There's only one type of sample, and you need 10 to get research points to purchase upgrades and perks. Samples are scattered around the map and aren't necessarily hard to find, but can be difficult to get to. And honestly, I really don't like the 3 tiers of samples that Helldivers 2 has. I personally prefer this system in Helldivers 1, but I can understand why others might like the Helldivers 2 grind more. But to me, since I got into the first game very late and play it super casually, being able to upgrade things and progress just by playing the easier missions is more appealing to me. The 3 factions are much more fun to fight in this game as well. The bugs feel more feral and less organized in this game, almost like wild animals that are in a pack together. Cyborgs have their own language and weapons that feel like they're waging a full-on war against Super Earth, with their own forces having some sort of orbital drops themselves. They're easily my second favorite faction in the game, my favorite being the Illuminate, which have these super cool alien and robot units as well as super deadly weapons. They're fun to fight here because they feel unique, not some faction that makes a bunch of zombies. Also, like I said earlier, there's this other robot faction that shows up in the tutorial and some challenge missions. They're not super unique, but again, it's kind of cool to have them as a 4th option. I can't comment too much on what each faction is like on the harder difficulties, but on the easy to medium difficulties, they offer a nice challenge. Unlike in Helldivers 2, there's no outposts or nests. You engage enemies based on patrols they have, and if you attract their attention, causes them to call for reinforcements. It does make stealth harder compared to Helldivers 2, but I think that's fine because it's not a stealth game. One of the things I greatly dislike about Helldivers 2 is that destroying enemy outposts doesn't really seem to change the amount of enemies you fight or patrols you'll encounter. In Helldivers 1, they get away with this by just not having to worry about outposts or anything, just various patrols in the area you're at. Which kinda makes sense if we're under the assumption that Helldivers are in fact an elite spec ops group conducting operations behind enemy lines. Graphically, this game has a unique palette and art style that feel much more sci-fi. Planets feel alien, unlike Helldivers 2, which feel like a weird Earth biome that has a filter on it, and maybe some weird environmental factors. Every planet in Helldivers, even planets you're fighting in city streets on, feel like sci-fi planets. The game also just looks beautiful. Like, the backgrounds feel like a very well done watercolor painting that you're running around in. Weapons sound punchy and feel good to use, and the blood splatters are very satisfying to see. One of the best things about this game, compared to its sequel, is how good stratagems are in this game. You can use the same set of stratagems if you want, and they're all just better. Like, the turrets actually get kills, the mechs are super powerful, and you can even call in a stratagem from the mech. The eagles are here as well, and they're super useful in certain environments. They might not be as punchy as the eagles from Helldivers 2, but they're more viable and feel more powerful. Even your character feels more powerful and deadly with the gravelly British accents you have. Like, I feel like I'm a killing machine when they talk.
Negative. Helldiver has left combat zone.
The mission variety is also just better. There's more unique missions depending on the difficulty, like in Helldivers 2, but there's just more types, I think, in the first game. Stuff like finding a black box from a crashed ship to escorting civilians to a bunker, and tons of variations in between. Because of the smaller map sizes and the missions being pretty straightforward, you can breeze through the earlier missions in a matter of minutes. I tend to get bored after playing one or two missions in Helldivers 2 because of how long they can take, but here it's just more bite-sized and enjoyable. Because of this bite-sized element, and the ease of progression in this game, you feel like you're contributing to the galactic war effort. While in Helldivers 2, I don't ever really feel like I'm contributing because the game wants hundreds of players on each planet. Like, you can play Helldivers 2 for like 3 hours a night and not really see any progress to the war effort, but in Helldivers 1, you can play for 3 hours and you can see the effort you made progressing the war effort. Is it less realistic in Helldivers 1? Yeah, but I'm not playing a sci-fi game for realism. But that's just me. Again, I understand why a lot of people prefer Helldivers 2's approach to this system, but I find it way more fun in Helldivers 1. Also, the civilian missions are so much better in this game. Yeah, they're escort missions, but it's way more fun to actually have to manually escort them from point A to point B instead of just opening a door and watching them move in a straight line to the extraction point. Customization is also much better in Helldivers, and this is just an objective fact. Just about every helmet can go with any piece of armor. There's a distinct art style for the armor that allows a sense of uniformity from one player to the next. Granted, this is mostly due to the top-down perspective of the game, but when you see your teammates, they all look the same, even if they're wearing different armor. Helldivers 2 took what I'd like to call the Legion approach to the armor, while Helldivers 1 took a more uniformed approach. Helldivers 2 armor feels like armor that different companies and units would wear in the Helldivers universe, which is fine, but makes putting a different helmet on most armors feel off. While there are some helmets and armor sets that don't match well in Helldivers 1, most helmets and armors can be mixed and matched to make your Helldivers feel yours. I will say though, the Helldiver 2 capes are much more fun to see. My last point against Helldivers 2 is that I think the soundtrack in Helldivers 1 is much more memorable. Don't get me wrong, the orchestral themes in Helldivers 2 are very impressive, and this could just be due to playing a lot of Helldivers 2 in PSN parties with a bunch of friends constantly talking, but I don't really remember any ambient tracks during combat and gameplay in Helldivers 2. I'm not saying they're not there, I'm saying I just don't really remember them. The Helldiver 1 tracks are so much catchier, and combined with the frantic nature of the gameplay in Helldivers 1, hearing these tracks during various combat sequences gives the game a pop Helldivers 2 lacks. Again, I don't dislike the Helldivers 2 soundtrack, but the tracks in Helldivers 1 are objectively better and way more memorable compared to the tracks in Helldivers 2, with each faction having different tracks based off the difficulty of the planet you're fighting on. A few other minor things I didn't really want to make a full section for, but I'll briefly talk about, is how I think Helldivers 1 handles its propaganda. Helldivers 1 has it subtly hidden within the text, like a senator's name being Killjoy. This isn't me saying something like, "Oh, why did you have to make Helldivers 2 woke and political?" No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, Helldivers 2 takes the satire of Helldivers 1 and almost makes a parody of itself in Helldivers 2. Like, in Helldivers 1, it's whatever. You could be the bad guys, you could be the good guys. You're the bad guys, but you could be the good guys. But Helldivers 2 really wants you to know you're 100% evil. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but I just don't really like the approach to it in Helldivers 2. It's a lot like the Starship Troopers sequels. Starship Troopers does a good job at the parody and satire, but then Starship Troopers 2... I don't have it on UMD. And especially Starship Troopers 3 take the funny satirical moments and almost make a parody of those moments by making them more outlandish and goofy. Again, there's nothing wrong with how Helldivers 2 does its satire. I just think its more subtle implementations in Helldivers 1 are more interesting. No, I'm not one of those people who complain about politics in video games. I love politics in video games. I just don't like how blatant Helldivers 2 is, because at times it just gets more annoying than funny. I can only hear the same propaganda broadcasts on the Super Earth TV before I'm just like, okay, I don't care. Also, I really like this upgrade system. Upgrading weapons and stratagems instead of just buying a better version of it. The perk system is nice too, and I like that there's a loadout system that allows you to pick loadouts based on the mission you're going on. The last stand bleeding out is also pretty cool. The encyclopedia on the ship is a nice feature as well, giving you some more insight and lore about the game. Wish this was in Helldivers 2. As a whole, nearly a decade later, I still find Helldivers 1 to be a much better game. The gameplay is more solid, the soundtrack is more memorable, the customization is better, the stratagems are more powerful, the planets are more vibrant, and the factions are much better. While I might have played more of Helldivers 2 overall, Helldivers 1 is just a more fun game to me. I like Helldivers 2 a lot, but it just isn't a third-person version of Helldivers 1. They're almost different games, with Helldivers 2 having a different art style, planet makeup, and even the Helldiver military structure feels different. In many cases, Helldivers 2 almost feels like a completely different game that was inspired by Helldivers 1, or a sort of reboot to the Helldivers franchise. That doesn't make Helldivers 2 bad, it just means I like the establishment of Helldivers 1 more. I can see myself still playing Helldivers 1 several years down the line, showing it off to my friends and family as a game that we might play at a reunion or something to just catch up on good times. But I can't say the same with Helldivers 2. It just isn't as appealing to me as the first game. I think Helldivers 2 is a great game. I think there's a lot of potential with Helldivers 2. And I can't wait to see what more is added to that game. But it's never going to top Helldivers 1. The twin-stick shooter approach just works better in a series like Helldivers.